Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today I am doing the Cosmere Book Tag. So this is a tag that is based on Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere, which is a world that many of his books and series take place in. I will link the original video down below, and I was tagged by Anita from Anita Reads, so thank you very much for tagging me. This tag looks like it'll be a lot of fun. I have only read one Brandon Sanderson book so far, which was The Final Empire, the first book in the Mistborn series, but my understanding of this tag is that you don't have to have read any of his books to be able to answer these questions, and they look like some interesting questions, so let's get into it. So the first question is Elantris, a book or series where the magic fails its people. And for this one, I am picking the 500 Kingdom series by Mercedes Lackey. This is the first one, the Fairy Godmother, and it's very shiny. This is a world that is all based on fairy tales. It has a type of magic called the tradition, which tries to force people's lives into the traditional paths of different myths and fairy tales. And some of those fairy tales are good, some of them are not. So I feel like the magic in this world can fail its people in many ways. It's an extremely controlling type of magic. It manipulates people's lives, their emotions, their thoughts, everything, just to force them into a storyline. And it doesn't really care about who they are as people, what their lives are like, what they want. It really only has this one motivation, that is to make their lives match a story. And it also very often fails people if the story that it picks is one that has an unhappy ending. The tradition does not care if it is ruining your life, if it is going to kill you. None of that matters. This magic only cares about its one goal of making your life match a story. And so it has failed many people in this world, and the fairy godmothers in this world work to protect the people from the tradition. The next question is Mistborn, your favorite ragtag gang. And for this one, I am picking Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. So this is another fantasy heist story that has a ragtag gang and or a little like gang of misfits. And I loved this duology. It's only 2 books, but you get so attached to the characters. One of the things that I love so much about these books and these characters is that they are so distinct when you read them. As someone who reads a lot of fantasy, I'm very used to multi-perspective books, but sometimes it can get confusing between reading from those different perspectives. But in this series, each of the characters in this gang are so individual, and even the writing from each perspective I think is so distinct that it is not confusing at all. It's really easy to know who you're reading from, and you really fall in love with each of them. And then throughout these just 2 books, all of them get to know each other so well, and they all just like bond, and it just, I love them all so much as individuals, but I also really love the friendships and relationships that they develop together throughout these books, and also the way that their strengths and weaknesses all complement each other within this group, whether they are strengths and weaknesses that have to do with the heist or just more personally, like on a more personal level. I think that they all mesh together really well as a group. Question 3 is Warbreaker, an interesting family dynamic. And for this, I am picking All the Crooked Saints by Maggie Stiefvater. This is one of her standalone books. It follows a family in the 1960s in Colorado who are saints. And so they have this kind of magical power that they can help people to remove their darkness, whatever is the darkest part of themselves, and improve people's lives. But the way that the magic works, they can't really directly interact with the pilgrims who come to see this family of saints. And so the family has very much isolated themselves from the rest of the world, from these pilgrims who come to live on their land and ask for their help. But the family is very bonded together, but they also have a lot of secrets, a lot of darkness within themselves, and they can't perform their saintly magic really on each other. So they have a lot of baggage and a lot of dark backstory to like things that have happened in their family, but they're also very close, and they're kind of the only people that they have. They all just have each other. And there are multiple generations who live together, and there are some cousins who are all very close, who are very lovable. Question 4 is Stormlight Archive, the biggest book you have read and the biggest book on your TBR. So I am not really sure what the biggest book I have ever read is, because I've read quite a few big books. I read a lot of high fantasy, which tend to be really large books. But one book that I have recently read that was a very big book is The Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb. This is the first book in her Live Ship Traders trilogy. And then another really big book that is on my TBR is the second book in the same series, which is The Mad Ship, also by Robin Hobb. So Ship of Magic was 880 pages. Mad Ship is, let's see how many pages this is, 906 pages. So this is probably the biggest book on my TBR that I own currently. I do eventually want to read that book, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which is a very large book and is over like 1,000 pages. So that is one that is also on my like mental TBR, but I don't own that one yet. The next question is Alloy Era, a series continuation that you didn't like as much as the original. And so for this one, it's more of like a spin-off series, but it's all a continuation of the same general story, which is The Trials of Apollo, the Hidden Oracle by Rick Riordan. All of his books are kind of like just spin-offs and continuations of the same stories, just focusing on slightly different characters. This one follows the god Apollo after he has angered Zeus and has been kicked out of Olympus and put into the body of a teenage boy, and now he has to live his life as a gawky teenage human boy without his godly powers, but some bad stuff is happening, and so now he has to gather friends and try to save the world as a human. Rick Riordan is an author that I generally really enjoy. I really love his, Percy Jackson series and the Heroes of Olympus series, I think is what it's called, which came before this. But this one just like didn't hit the mark for me. I just didn't really like the sense of humor. I know a lot of people really enjoyed the humor in this one, but to me it felt like it was just one joke that was done over and over and over again throughout the entire book, which essentially is just he's a really arrogant god who's used to having powers and everyone loving him, but he's in this awkward human boy body and can't do anything. And to me, like, that's a semi-funny joke, but it's not as funny after it's just like told over and over and over again in the same book. So I just found it kind of frustrating. I'm gonna continue the series because I've only read the first one because I love Rick Riordan's books in general, and I want to know what happens because all of his series do overlap and you get a more full view of like a larger storyline that's happening by reading all of the books. So I will continue with this one, but this is definitely my least favorite of all of the Rick Riordan books I have read. And the next question is White Sand, an underdog you root for. And for this one, I am going to pick a different Rick Riordan book, which is The Lost Hero, and specifically Leo Valdez in this series. I really love Leo. He is so funny and so creative, but I feel like he is an underdog in this world in that I think a lot of people really underestimate him. A lot of these demigods in the series are very valued for their fighting ability, and Leo's not that much of a fighter. He's more of a thinker, and he's more like tricky and kind of like figuring out creative ways to get around problems and like how to build new things and fix stuff, and like he's very creative in that way. And he saves them a bunch of times throughout this series using that strength of his of being so creative and being able to like fix anything or build anything or just come up with these amazing ideas. But I think that he is kind of considered an underdog in this world and among these demigods because he's not like this big strong fighter, that he's more of a thinker and a builder and a creative kind of person. But I love him and his character so much. He's always like one of my favorite perspectives to read from in this series. Question 7 is Arcanum Unbound. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, but it is your favorite anthology, and for this one I am picking The Language of Thorns by Leigh Bardugo. Anthologies are always a tough one for me because it's so hard to just find an anthology that you really love all the way through, because there are so many like little stories in it. But this is one that I genuinely enjoyed. I think every story that I read, obviously some more than others, but this is a book of fairy tales from the Grishaverse. So the world that Leigh Bardugo writes her stories in, these are the fairy tales that the people of that world would know and would have grown up with. And they do have a lot of similarities to some of our own fairy tales, but I think that she tells them in a very unique way, and she combines a couple of different fairy tales together usually, and often does unusual combinations that I wouldn't have expected, or tells them in a way that is a little bit darker or just has an interesting perspective or twist on them. I really enjoyed this anthology, and I loved the voice that she had for it because it definitely didn't sugarcoat these fairy tales. They were definitely dark, and they had that very classic dark kind of unsettling fairy tale vibe to them. The next question is Investiture. Coolest magic system. That's another one that I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but the question is coolest magic system, and for this one I am picking Rune Lords by David Farland. This is one that has been a very long time since I read. It has been probably at least 10 years, so I don't remember it that well. But when I read this, I really loved it, and I thought the magic system was really fascinating for this one. It's a little hard to explain, especially like in a short period of time, but it has a type of magic where people are able to endow abilities or qualities onto somebody else. And the way that they do it is that they use this kind of branding magic. So they take like a hot metal brand, they brand one person, do this kind of ceremony, and then they brand another person, and that magically transfers a ability or a quality to that person, and then the person who gave it up no longer has it at all. So you can transfer like eyesight to somebody else, and so the person who receives it, their eyesight is twice as good as it was before, because now they have the eyesight of two people, whereas the person who gave it up is now blind. But in order for the person to retain this magic, or the eyesight that they took from the other person, they have to keep that person alive, the person who donated it, because if the donor dies, then the magic dies, or the quality dies with them. So it creates a really interesting dynamic and a very interesting power dynamic between people who give and take these qualities, and then the way that the people who receive them have to care for those who have given them, otherwise they'll lose what they have gotten. So I have been wanting to reread this one because, as I said, it's been like 10 years since I read it, and I did think it was really interesting, but I can barely remember it now. And question 9 is Shadesmar, another one, who knows if I'm saying it right, but a book with alternate realms. And for this one, I feel like I'm picking kind of an obvious one, which is A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. The whole Shades of Magic series takes place in multiple realms. So it takes place in London, but there are 4 parallel Londons. There is Red London, Grey London, White London, and Black London. And this is a series that I recently read. It was a lot of fun to read, definitely very fast-paced, and yeah, it definitely fits this one for having multiple realms. And the last question is, who do you tag? And I'm going to tag Ashley from Don't Have a Degree in Reading. I don't know if you have been tagged in this already or done it, but I am tagging you if you want to do it. That is all for my Cosmere book tag. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!